Anybody you can think of who is black, who works in television, and who owns the show and who has the title of executive producer came after Soul Train.
He looks at me and was like, "Oh, you guys are intelligent." I'm like, in my mind, because you know I was young and feisty, right? In my mind, I'm like, you basically trying to say you thought we were.
Don Cornelius, he had been in the club many times. Many people saw him, so they didn't have any fear at the time. And these two young girls got in his Rolls Royce and went up to his house.
Did you know there was a sabotage of Don Cornelius and Soul Train? People always loved Soul Train, but behind the scenes, things were not so bright. From Dick Clark trying to copy Soul Train with his own show, causing a big fight between him and Don.
And from New York City, here's one of the most versatile and exciting bands in our industry, and they are known as Full Force.
To Don Cornelius, facing serious legal troubles, including a domestic violence case and even scary assault claims.
We've just learned that the original host of the television rock and roll and dance show, Soul Train, is dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
What really happened to the man who brought so much joy to millions? Let's get into it. Now, Soul Train was a music and dance show that gave a big stage to black music, black culture, and black dancers. The show became very popular very quickly. A lot of people loved it because it showed African-American artists in a way that had not been seen much on TV before. Don Cornelius had a dream to spread black music and pride across America. As Soul Train became more and more successful, it started to catch the attention of many people, including a famous TV host named Dick Clark.
Anybody you can think of who is black, who works in television, and who owns the show and who has the title of executive producer came after Soul Train.
Dick Clark saw how much people loved Soul Train and realized there was a lot of money and attention in this new black music market. In 1973, Clark made a new show called Soul Unlimited. This new show looked almost exactly like Soul Train.
You do too. I know when I was growing up, my brother played guitar too, and every time I'd say, "Hey man, teach me how to play guitar," he'd say, "Get away, squirt,"
It had black artists, dancers, and the same style. Many people thought that Dick Clark was trying to copy Don Cornelius's idea and take away his success. They believed Clark wanted to control the black music audience for himself. This upset a lot of people because Don Cornelius had worked hard to build something special for the black community. Before all of this happened, in the 1960s, there were already music shows on TV. Shows like Shindig, Ready, Steady, Go, and Dick Clark's own American Bandstand were very popular.
It must be 3 or 4 years since Richard began to tell me about the music that you people were making.
These shows mostly focused on pop and rock music. Don Cornelius watched these shows and had an idea. He thought, why isn't there a show like this for black music and black culture? So he decided to make one. He wanted to create a show that would celebrate black people, their talents, and their style. He wanted black kids to turn on the TV and see people who looked like them being proud and successful.
When you believe in things that you don't understand.
Don Cornelius had a hard life before he became famous. He had been a soldier in the Korean War. After that, he worked many different jobs, like selling insurance and driving a police car. Eventually, he found a job he loved, being a disc jockey on a Chicago radio station called WV-ON. His deep, strong voice made him stand out. Don was very ambitious. In the late 1960s, he hosted a small news program called A Black's View of the News, but he kept dreaming about a music and dance show that would shine a light on black talent. When Soul Train first started, there was not much money to work with. Because of this, Don kept the show in Chicago. Luckily, Chicago had a lot of talented musicians and dancers. It was even called the dance capital of the world. Don would go out into the streets, parks, and neighborhoods to find young dancers. He gave them a chance to be on TV and show their moves. He also invited local musicians like Curtis Mayfield, Jerry Butler, and the Chi-Lites to perform. These artists helped the show become very popular in Chicago. After 1 year of local success, Soul Train caught the eye of a man named George Johnson. He owned a company that made hair products for black people. Johnson loved what Don Cornelius was doing and decided to help sponsor the show. Because of his help, Soul Train could now be shown all across America. In 1971, Don Cornelius moved the show to Los Angeles. Even in LA, Don and his team would go to parks and schools to find the best dancers. Instead of paying them money, he gave them the chance to be seen on TV, and the kids loved it. Everyone wanted to be on Soul Train.
He was so full of knowledge that it was amazing, and I have to say that Don was one of the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life.
Back in the early 1970s, when the problem started between Dick and Don, in Chicago, Reverend Jesse Jackson
I may be poor, but I am somebody.
and other black leaders heard about Dick Clark's plan. They were very upset. They felt like Clark was trying to steal something that was very important to black culture. Jesse Jackson and others went to ABC executives and protested. They said it was unfair that Dick Clark, who black people already had mixed feelings about, could take over and maybe even destroy Soul Train. They even threatened to boycott ABC if the network allowed Clark's plan to move forward. Clarence Avant.
You know, you people are in business school. I never was in business school. I was in street school. I graduated with honors from the University of Harlem.
One of the biggest and most powerful men in the black music business at the time also got involved. Avant was a consultant for ABC, so his voice carried a lot of weight. When Avant heard about Dick Clark's plan, he was furious. Dick invited Avant to a meeting to talk about Soul Unlimited. Dick wanted Avant to give him permission and support for the new show, but Avant was not having it. He told Clark directly, "If you do this, there's no Don Cornelius." Avant knew that black people had worked so hard to finally have a place like Soul Train on TV. He was not about to let someone like Dick Clark ruin it.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us gather around here. Now, Judy, I said you'd introduce me to everybody. This is where I test myself.
After that meeting, Clarence Avant took it even further. He went straight to New York to meet with the top bosses at ABC. He met with Leonard Goldenson, the chairman and founder of ABC, and Eldon H. Rule, the president. Avant made it very clear to them that he was very upset. He told them that if they allowed Dick Clark to move forward, it would destroy everything that Don Cornelius had built for black music and black culture. Avant stood strong and refused to back down. Not long after, Avant received a threatening letter from the William Morris Agency. They represented Dick Clark's company. The letter told Avant to stay out of their business. But Avant was not someone who could be easily scared. He was a powerful man behind the scenes, and he knew he had to fight for what was right. He refused to be intimidated. After all this drama, it is said that Don Cornelius never spoke to Dick Clark again. Don Cornelius was deeply hurt and angry. The truth is, race played a big part in all of this. Don Cornelius was the perfect person to present black music and culture because he lived it, he understood it, and he loved it. But even though Clark was smart enough to recognize a good thing, it didn't mean he should take it away. Black culture deserves to be represented by black people. When people outside a culture try to copy it, it always feels different and not always in a good way. Imagine if Dick Clark had succeeded. We might have grown up with Soul Unlimited instead of Soul Train. We would have missed out on seeing amazing dancers like the Lockers, Louis Ski Car, Rosie Perez, and Damita Jo. We would not have had that cool, soulful feeling that Don Cornelius brought to every show. And we would have missed the amazing performances from the best soul artists of the time. But as the 1980s came closer, things started to change. New channels like MTV and BET started showing music videos all day long. Viewers now had more choices. Younger people began watching these new channels more and more. Meanwhile, Soul Train's main audience was getting older. It became harder to keep the show fresh and exciting. Although Cornelius worked very hard, it was clear that the golden days of Soul Train were starting to fade. Speaking of dancers, so Don had a complicated relationship with his dancers, even though they were a huge part of what made the show iconic. Early on, Soul Train became the place where young black dancers could show off the latest moves, invent new styles, and even launch careers. But behind the scenes, it wasn't always a party. Don was extremely strict about how he ran the show. He treated Soul Train like his personal empire, and didn't like anything happening that he couldn't control. Dancers weren't paid. They showed up for free, and in exchange, they got TV exposure. As some dancers started gaining fame in their own right, Don wasn't exactly happy about it. If you pushed back against him or tried to negotiate for better treatment, you were basically blacklisted. He didn't play games when it came to protecting his brand. A few names really stand out when it comes to dancers who had issues with Don. Jody Watley, who started on Soul Train as a teenager and went on to become a Grammy-winning artist, has said that while she's grateful for the platform, there was definitely a feeling among the dancers that they were being used. They brought the energy, the trends, the fresh moves, but didn't get paid or fully respected for it. She also hinted that Don could be cold and dismissive if you started thinking you deserved more. Jeffrey Daniel is another big one. He helped popularize the backslide, what would later be known as the moonwalk, and even taught it to Michael Jackson. He's talked about how dancers weren't treated fairly, and how Don would get uncomfortable once a dancer started gaining too much attention outside of the show. Building your own brand off the show's fame was pretty much a fast track to getting on Don's bad side. Demita Jo Freeman, one of the standout dancers in the early 70s, known for her crazy energy and creativity.
Camera, we were the first ones to start doing all this locking and hitting the floor, and I'm this girl going this way, he's going, it was just incredible.
Also eventually left Soul Train to pursue acting and other opportunities. But even before she left, there were already stories about her feeling limited and controlled. Like she wasn't really allowed to take full credit for the magic she brought to the screen. Then there's Pat Davis, one of the original Soul Train dancers, who was part of the bigger complaints about how dancers were treated overall. It wasn't just about money. It was also about how Don operated behind the scenes. Nobody could question anything without risking being replaced. At one point in the mid-1970s, a group of dancers who called themselves the Soul Train Gang even tried to sue Don. They felt exploited and believed they deserved to be compensated, especially since they had become such a huge reason people tuned in every week. It wasn't one massive public. It was more like an open secret. If you danced on Soul Train, you got fame, but not much else. And Don Cornelius made sure it stayed that way. Don Cornelius died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
We've just learned that the original host of the television rock and roll and dance show, Soul Train, is dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
He was 75 years old. His death made many people look back at his life. Not just the good parts, but also the sad and painful parts. Cornelius struggled with serious health problems for many years. In 1982, he had to go through a very long and hard surgery. It lasted 21 hours. The surgery was done to fix a problem he had in his brain since birth. After the surgery, Cornelius said that you have to choose a brain surgeon who is very strong because the operation takes so long. He also said that after the surgery, he never felt quite the same. Even simple things like traveling became very hard for him. His health struggles made his later years very difficult. Don was once accused of something very serious. In a documentary series called Secrets of Playboy, a former Playboy bunny named PJ Maston told a very upsetting story about him.
He had been in the club many times. Many people saw him, so they didn't have any fear at the time.
She said that many years ago, Cornelius locked up and hurt 2 young women. Maston worked at the Playboy Mansion and took care of the other bunnies. She shared that Cornelius was very well known at Playboy because he was a VIP guest. Many women knew who he was, and he often got special treatment. One night, 2 sisters who were new at Playboy caught his attention. He invited them to a private VIP area at the mansion, and later, he asked them to come to a party at his house. The sisters went with Cornelius in his fancy Rolls-Royce car. After that night, they disappeared. No one knew where they had gone. For 3 long days, the sisters were missing. Everyone at Playboy started to get worried. When the sisters finally came back, they were in terrible shape. They had been badly hurt. According to Maston, the sisters had escaped from Cornelius' home. They were found bloodied, bruised, and drugged. It was clear they had been through something very bad. The sisters said they had been locked in separate rooms and were hurt by Cornelius while they were trapped.
One was locked in one room and the other was in another room, tied up and bound. And the sister could hear her screaming, and there were wooden objects.
The story got even worse. The sisters told Mastin that they had been tied up. One sister said she could hear her sister screaming from another room. It was a nightmare for them. But back then, Playboy had strict rules. The women were told not to call the police. Instead, Playboy's own security team handled the problem. They also warned the women not to talk to the news about what happened. Playboy wanted to protect its VIP guests and its image.
It was horrible, horrible. And as Playboy rules were, you couldn't call the police, you call the mansion, and
PJ Mastin said she felt very angry about how things were handled. She said Cornelius came back to the Playboy Club the very next week, like nothing had happened. Even though the two sisters had suffered, no charges were ever filed against him. Mastin said she felt guilty for staying quiet for so long. She said she wanted to speak out back then, but she was afraid. She thought no one would believe her, and she knew Playboy would protect Cornelius over the young women.
Security there was not about making sure these girls were safe. It was about making sure that the guests didn't do anything that Hefner would not have wanted them to do.
After the documentary aired, Don Cornelius' son, Tony Cornelius, spoke out in the media. Tony said that the story Mastin told was not believable. He said there was no real proof to back up her claims. Tony stood by his father and said the story was just a rumor without solid evidence. It is important to remember that Don Cornelius was never officially investigated for what Mastin accused him of. He was never charged with any crime related to those young women. However, Cornelius did have some legal trouble a few years before he died. In 2008, Don Cornelius got into serious trouble with the law. He was arrested at his home in Los Angeles. The police accused him of hurting his wife, Victoria Avila Cornelius, who was also known as Victoria Chapman. After the arrest, he was able to leave jail by paying bail money. Then, in November 2008, he had to go to court. He was charged with hurting his wife and also trying to stop her from telling the police what happened. In December 2008, Cornelius went back to court. He told the judge that he was not guilty, but the situation got worse after that. His wife got 2 restraining orders against him. A restraining order means the court tells a person to stay away from someone because they are afraid for their safety. Cornelius was not allowed to be near his wife anymore. Then, in March 2009, Cornelius changed his plea. He agreed to plead no contest, which meant he didn't fight the charges but also didn't admit he was guilty. As a result, the judge placed him on probation for 3 years. During that time, Cornelius had to follow strict rules or risk going to jail. Resistance to hip-hop. Even though Cornelius had these problems, his show Soul Train had already made a big impact on American culture. But things were changing in the music world. By the late 1970s, a new style of music was growing in New York City. It was called hip-hop. A journalist named John Heilemann once said that hip-hop was the last new American art form. Hip-hop mixed the sounds of funk and disco, 2 styles that were already popular on Soul Train. At first, Don did not like hip-hop. He didn't understand it and didn't think it would last long. Many older musicians at the time also didn't like hip-hop, but Cornelius was smart enough to stay open-minded. In 1980, just 1 year after the song Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang became a big hit, Cornelius invited a hip-hop artist named Curtis Blow onto Soul Train. When Cornelius interviewed Curtis Blow, he admitted that he didn't really understand hip-hop or why so many young people loved it.
Let's get some hands together, gang, for Mr. Curtis Blow.
He looks at me and was like, "Oh, you guys are intelligent." I'm like, in my mind, because you know I was young and feisty, right? In my mind, I'm like, you basically trying to say you thought we was stupid.
Even though Cornelius didn't fully love hip-hop, he still allowed more and more hip-hop artists to come on Soul Train in the 1980s. Artists like Run DMC and others got a chance to show their music to a bigger audience because of Cornelius. Many hip-hop stars looked up to him because he gave them a big opportunity, even if he wasn't their biggest fan at first. Sadly, the 1980s were also the beginning of hard times for both Soul Train and Don Cornelius. New TV channels like MTV and BET were starting. MTV was all about music videos, but at first they did not show many black artists. BET, or Black Entertainment Television, was made just for black audiences and showed a lot of music. Because of these new channels, Soul Train started losing its viewers. People had more choices and fewer people were watching the show. Don had always been the heart and soul of Soul Train. Every weekend, he introduced new music and artists to the world. But now, with music videos on every channel, Cornelius started to feel out of touch. He joked once that he could try to talk like the younger generation, saying, "Yeah, what's up?" But he would look silly doing it. Cornelius started feeling like he didn't belong anymore. On top of everything else, his health never fully recovered. By the time the 1990s came around, Cornelius decided it was time to retire. After many years of hard work and success, he stepped away from Soul Train and left behind a complicated legacy that people still talk about today.
My name is Shamar Moore, and believe me when I tell you, we getting ready to have some fun up in here. Why? Because I stand up here week after week trying to get you hyped over the fact that don't nobody throw a party like we do.
Before Soul Train, there were not many places where African-American singers and dancers could be seen by people all across the country. Cornelius was not just the host. He also wrote and produced the show. He helped bring famous stars like James Brown, Stevie Wonder, and Michael Jackson into homes everywhere. Because of Cornelius, soul music and black culture became a much bigger part of American life. After Cornelius died, many famous people spoke about how much he had meant to them. Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, said that his death was sad, stunning, and downright shocking. She said it was a huge loss for African Americans and for the world. In an interview, Franklin said Cornelius was not just a businessman, he was a role model for young black people. She said he was always a gentleman, with a beautiful sense of humor. Franklin explained that being on Soul Train helped many artists, including herself, become famous. She said that one appearance on Soul Train could turn someone from a nobody into a superstar almost overnight. It helped artists sell many more records than they would have without the show. Other stars also remembered Cornelius with love and respect. Smokey Robinson said that Cornelius gave young black people hope and showed the world their talent in a positive way. Quincy Jones, a famous music producer, called Cornelius a visionary pioneer and a giant in the business. Jones said that before there was MTV, there was Soul Train. And that was Cornelius's great gift to the world. Jones also said that nobody could ever match what Cornelius did for television, music, and culture. Many hearts went out to Cornelius's family and loved ones after his passing. Even though his life had dark moments, Don Cornelius's legacy of love, peace, and soul will live on forever.